Today is October the 9th, 2025. We are in Tulsa, Oklahoma to speak with Hubert Pollok. And this is for the Wartime Survivors Project. And along with me is Alex Bishop. I'm Tanya Finchum. Did I say that? And we're with Oklahoma State University. So thank you for letting us come into your home today. Before we get into a whole lot of things, let's start with having you tell us something about yourself. Wait, I want to say one more thing. Tomorrow will be your 74th anniversary for arriving in Tulsa.
Wow.
Right? October 10th, 1951.
Wow.
Tomorrow's the 74th year, right? That's what I read.
10-10.
Okay, there we go.
10-10, 1951. I arrived by train here in Tulsa. It was only to be a stopover, but as you can see, 74 years later, I'm still here. I lived my life in Tulsa, essentially, although the preceding 25 years, or 26, close to 26, I lived in the world. I lived in different worlds, so to speak. The home that I grew up was a little village of 600 people cut out in the forest. We were completely surrounded by mostly pine forest, because pine thrives on sandy soil, and this was alluvial soil from the ice ages, and the arable land was very poor. It was only maybe 10 inches of it, no more, sand underneath there. So it was difficult to live off the land, although the 7 or 8 acres that my dad owned provided our living. We lived off the land. We lived off what we produced, and sometimes the land would, in a dry season of the summer, the harvests were poor, and it was difficult for some of the villagers to live. Essentially, my life was maybe in 4 different phases. I lived at home. Our language was an old Slavic language, although I lived in Germany, I should say. I was a German citizen. But my cradle language was this old Slavic language that the people in this province of Upper Silesia of Eastern Germany spoke. The root of it was Polish, and Poland gave Silesia to the Czechs in 1335 to have peace. They gave it to Czechs, and over the rest of the time till today, it was the Czechs. Then we were under the Hungarian. Then we were under the Austrian. Then we were under the Prussian. Then we were in Germany since 1870. Let's see. Germany 1871, and after the Franco-Prussian War. Over time, of course, I learned German in the grammar school, but actually I never completely was perfect speaking German till I went to high school in the 21-mile distant high school that I attended, and I actually had to go to high school when I was 12 and go by bicycle to the railroad station, which was 4 miles away, and then go by railroad about 17 miles, and then on foot another mile to the high school from the railroad station, and then back. So, but then when I reached the age of 15, the school or the government or someone built a home for students like me who came from distant areas, and we got to stay there. And of course, I was exposed to German only. So I really learned the German language in high school. Well, while being in high school and in this town by the name of Oppeln, which today is Opole because that part became part of Poland. Well, the school that I attended was Burggymnasium, which means gymnasium. It means high school on the castle. One time it used to be a castle in the early 1400, but then it converted to, later on in the 1700, it converted to a jail. And then it was actually some offices, but in about 1840 maybe it became the high school, and they added new buildings, but there were vestiges of the old castle wall still standing. And of course, early in the 1800s, they done away with the wall surrounding the city, and that was converted to parks. Yeah, so, well, while being in town, I, of course, was part of the Hitler Youth, which opened the window for a youngster that I was, and they provided gliding in gliders and sailing later on, and that was my hobby. I spent lots of time, lots of weekends gliding to begin with, simple flights, maybe 2 minutes, but then later on I had flights of 2 hours. You have to catch a thermal, as you call them, to stay in them like birds, and that was my ambition. And of course, since I was exposed to gliding and flying, when time came, I joined the Air Force. But before that, while still at high school, they took our class and we became Luftwaffenhelfer, which helpers for defending a industrial complex by the name of IG Farben, which is a chemical company that had moved to Upper Silesia, to Heidelberg, and we manned anti-aircraft guns. We were just 17 years old at that time. And then after a stint when I turned to be 18, I was drafted to the Air Force in Vienna and subsequently boot camp in Toul, France. Well, that's about the early. Then that was in let's see, that was in 44, and while still in boot camp, one day there was lots of excitement because American tanks appeared some 20 miles away. So I still remember we were called, and we had to line up and put our ammunition in front of us, which were picked up, which was not real ammunition, it was exercise ammunition, the points being just wood. And they exploded, leaving the muzzle of the gun after traveling maybe 10 feet. But some guys came, picked them up, and real ammunition were placed in front of us, and the real war started pretty soon. Well, we were used as kind of a stormtrooper, a special unit. Our name of the company was Luftwaffensturmbataillon number 17. That means number 17, the air commando, so to speak. We were used in different areas where there was fire, and moved back and forth. It wasn't a long time. It was perhaps just 3 months of it. But surprisingly, our captain by the name of Bessemer, I remember it to this day, he was the first one to die in our unit when we were used. And the day was September 13th, 1944. And I remember it because my mother's birthday was September 13th, and he was the first one of our unit to die. Well, there were others, whatever, but I became prisoner. How did I become prisoner? We were to move out without having eaten. So a friend of mine by the name of Josef Vicha suggested we should go into the orchard that beckoned, that fruit, the apple trees beckoned, and we were forbidden to go in there. But since we were going to leave and hungry, he suggested we go to the orchard, and we did. We thought we would, because we were to retire, and we heard the notice of retreat. The first one to it, but because the guy that came and brought the news to our unit babbled to us. He should have probably not done it, but we went on the sneak getting the apples, and while we were seeing the apples and eating them, they were the most sour apples ever. You couldn't eat them, but it was night. It was getting evening, night. we saw light. Well, we thought, where there is light, there must be people, and where there are people, there must be food. And that's what we headed for. An old lady answered when we knocked, and she opened it, and my friend Yoda Bicha, he could speak a little French, so he asked for breakfast, and I still remember it was, she put a loaf of bread on the table. We didn't wait for the eggs. We just split it, and no knife. We just broke the bread like Jesus did, you know, and ate it before we got them. And when the eggs came, hands up. The local not real army, the underground, apparently got the notice that we were in. There were 3 of us, hands up, and we were in prison.
This was in France?
That was in France, yes. So it was in the Vosges Gap, the Vosges Gap between Switzerland and the Vosges, or Vogesen in German, a mountain chain that lies in Alsace. It's a very contested real piece of real estate between France and Germany. Stop it for a while.
I want to know, you lived in a village, but you kind of had like a little farm, right?
Yes.
Did you have to do chores? Who made you do chores?
Yeah, there were plenty of them. I'll tell you about it.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay, I'm on.
You're on.
Oh,
You turned
okay.
it back on?
Our village was founded in 1771 by Frederick II, a Prussian. We were part of Prussia because Prussia recovered the land from Austria through 3 different wars. One in 1740, one in 1748, and one 7-year-long war in 1756 through 63. Is that 7? Yeah, that's 7 years. It was terrible. The 7-year war was just unbelievable, destructive, and so on. But eventually, Frederick the Great, which they call great, won the war and won Silesia. That was the contention. Silesia, which was between Poland and between Germany. There was Prussia. Of course, later it united. Prussia and Germany became one. Well, my childhood, as I said, our village was just the early, and one of my ancestors was the first. I think there were 40 families that were allowed to tracks in the forest, and they had to cut the lumber, cut the trees, and make the land arable. So my family lived there for 200 years in the same house, essentially, till 1971, when my brother, my father, my mother, and other relatives and sister, they all moved to West Germany. So there are no Pollocks in Upper Silesia that lived there for 200 years in one home, and I lived in the house, but I didn't make the 200. I left when I was about, well, in 1940, 44 when I left.
Can you describe the house?
The house was a simple house with a roof that was maybe 50 years old. And recently, when I visited my village, the new owner put a new roof on, and it was up front was 2 living rooms and a cellar, entrance to the cellar, and a kitchen, and a small place where my dad and mom had a little store, a local store, the only one in the village, so to speak. And when I reflect now that we were a bunch of kids, how the heck did we manage to live in 2 bedrooms? Not all 10, but and we also had a maid at one time. Well, toward the end, I remember a maid, and she was of Polish origin. Well, she actually lived in Poland, but came and stayed with us, and I would sleep in the same room as the maid. Of course, I was just maybe 10 or 9, 10 years old.
So
Well, getting back to our village, it was one street hacked out of the forest, and houses on both sides. And of course, the original houses were cabins built out of logs that they had cut and such with straw. The roof was a straw roof. And there were a few houses left in my time, but on a recent village, in fact, last year when we visited it, those have disappeared, and some of them should have been preserved for posterity. And my childhood, well, it was a cramped quarters. The front of the house with 2 bedrooms, and the place where we kept the items for sale to the public were up front of the house, and the back, the other half of the house where the animals lived. They were all stabled. A horse, 3 pigs, 3 cows, and I say the cows provided the milk that were milked, and they provided the butter. And how did we get the butter from milk? Well, there was a separator. First you had to milk the cow, then you had to put it in a separator. That was my job, turning the separator. And then you would have the make butter. It's a special, it was a tub with a I can't exactly describe it. Anyway, a tub with a disc at the disc that handle, and you would go up and down, and the milk, the cream would turn first into little pieces of butter. They would float, and eventually they would coagulate and hold together, and that was the butter. And the butter was not taken out, and it was painted into wooden frames that had flowers on it, and the frame was taken. They were taken out of So a block looked so nice, but and tasteful too. Yeah. Well, that was one activity, churning the milk, separating the milk, but there were other ideas. One was when my dad prepared fodder for the cows or the horses, and I said it already. They were stabled. They were chained. They never came out of the stable. Food, all feed, and all water had to be brought into the animal. That was one job. So sometimes we were to get the bucket of water and pour it in the trough, and the animals were glad to lap the water off, drink, yeah. And then to prepare the feed, there was a special mechanism where the horse would pull a beam, and the beam was tied to a mechanical things in the center, and then the power was transferred into the barn, which in the barn there was a machine that was turning or with knives cutting the straw or hay or whatever, mostly straw and maybe corn, which we never ate anyway. Like they make silage, used to make silage in the United States. We would not make silage, but we would cut it and the fodder for the cows and horses. And I remember I had to walk behind the beam, behind the horse. He had to go around, and I got tired walking. So I got the idea, sit in the center. You just sit in the center and walk. The horse walks around, but the machinery was covered with boards, encased in it. But over time, some of the boards got rotten, but I would hold my legs high. And then I thought it would be nice to close my eyes and see the thing go around. But by doing so, my legs would go low, and all of a sudden, I got caught between the sprockets, between the teeth of the machinery. Fortunately, I had heavy shoes on, so it compressed. Although the shoes were strong, it compressed my toe. To this day, you see this toe right there? It used to be flattened. And I remember this horse had enough sense to stop, I suppose. My dad and I was screaming like a pig, and my dad ran out of the shed and unhitched the horse, put the beam back. It took me off, and I was screaming, of course, and he took the not the bat, but
The switch.
the stick, yeah, and he hit me with it.
He was
And
mad
I
at
was
you.
jumping like a rabbit with a bad foot. And of course, as it happened, a salesman was at the place with an auto, which
Car.
There were no vehicles in my village, no motor vehicles of any kind, nor electricity, nor anything, no telephone, or whatever. So my mother asked this salesman if he would haul me to the hospital. And he did. And the doctor, of course, he did it and he rolled it because it was flattened, as you can see. Right, right there's a scar, and it's a little deformed, but but the nail never grows out. It always goes straight up. So I have to watch out and trim it quite often.
Well, it sounds like in your family. Who was the disciplinarian? Your mother or your father?
Well, both of them, but well, disciplinarian. That's corporal punishment was at home. It was practiced then throughout the village, probably. Today it's unthinkable to corporal punishment, although I practiced it once or twice. And I promised the kids, our kids, when they reached 12, I would spank them on their birthday one time, and I said, that's the last time. But getting back to the hospital, the doctor fixed it. It was night by then. I remember my mother come home, but on the way home, and I really don't remember how we got back, whether the salesman waited I don't know the return, but my mother was saying, when Dad asked how much it was, say it was only $5 or 5 marks, not dollars. Yeah. To placate Dad, because they were still looking for take care of pennies, or dollars. Yeah, it was a difficult time, and that was probably in 1934 or 35. I was 9 years old. That's about right. They were difficult time. You want to stop for a while?
No, I was going to ask, so is your mother, your father, and how many children in this home?
Well, we were 10, but I remember only 6.
6. Plus the maid.
Yeah. And I should say my youngest brother died because of diphtheria in 1942 when he was 6 or 7 years old. But then 4 of us got to live over 90.
Wow.
And so my brother that was 98 died about 2 years ago, and my sister that was 90, the youngest child, or sister was 91. She died about,
2 years ago, maybe 3.
3 years ago.
Do you have any idea why that you've lived that long, all of you?
They all had to work very hard and very difficult time. They actually lived in Poland for about 25 years because they were not allowed to. The problem was, as I said, we spoke this Polnish, which is a offshoot of Polish of 800 years ago. That was a different language anyway. And but the Poles, instead of sending the inhabitants out, they let these people, us, stay after World War. And I say us, I included myself. I was out of the country anyway. But they let them stay. And at first it was maybe best because we provided our own food and whatever. but eventually they could not live under the Polish rule. They were discriminated against, although, and so on.
Going back to like the wartime, when you were captured by the French, can you talk a little bit about what it was like to be a POW, and did you have to switch camps? Did you have to
At first, I remember I spent a few days in a fire station, and a Negro was receiving me. And I never forget that I actually had my hands tied with a plastic band, that you use. And I remember we were traveling over rough terrain, not highways. They stayed away from it. It was at night, and it was wet country lane, and he made curves trying to avoid potholes and whatever. So we were in a little truck. I was from one end. I hit myself several times. But then when we arrived at the fire station, this Negro with a knife, my God, I thought he was going to butcher me. Instead, he came and cut my fetlers, and then he sat down, had a fire going in a drum. He opened up a can, he ate some of it, and then he handed it over to me. That was God's food, special food. I was hungry, we all were hungry, all three of us. And I ended up then later on, after several days stay at the fire station, we ended up in a big shed. I mean, it was a hay barn or something like that. Huge. Maybe there were 100 people in this barn, and we were hiding in the straw or hay, whatever was available. Because it was late in the fall, so the night was really cold, and all we had was what we had on, So we would make little hole in this hay or straw, whatever it was, and there was one bulb hanging, making like electric light, and we stayed at this place for maybe 2 weeks. All I remember, we made a march to a city close by, and we found myself on a railroad station. And as we walked along the railroad station, a guy across the line in blue jeans or blue dress, he pointed with a finger, and I wanted to get. I looked over, and there was a big can, gallon can full of food that he collected from discarded cans that were thrown out by probably American GIs from the train. They threw them out, and he collected all that, and I was so glad to, once I reached for it, as we walked by, I was so glad because it was all beans and bully beef and stuff like that he collected, but it was good food to my soul and my body. Yeah. Well, the most important point that I wrote in English, in a class one time, was our assignment was, after staying at this place for 2 weeks, two colored guys came, Senegalese soldiers in the French army. They came and they called out names. They could not. So eventually, a prisoner, a German corporal, was assigned to read the names. Well, there were about, I don't know how many, maybe 20 were called. And Joseph, my friend, Joseph Vicha, his name was called too. And he was the last one because the W was the last one. Vicha spelled with a W. So I stepped forward too. And that was the assignment in my class. It was, I perceived, as the most important step that I made in my life. But then I found there were many steps that I made. Maybe a dozen, maybe 100. but I stepped forward, and I stepped forward. By doing so, those that were called, they provided the passport or the papers with them. My passport, I was a lost sheep. You see, it didn't go with me because I just stepped forward without being called, only to discover that all these that were called were Polish, of Polish origin. And Joseph Vicha, my friend, was from the territory, from Upper Silesia, that was rendered to Poland, that appeared in 1921 after being, there was no Poland for 125 years because Poland was divided by Russia, Austria, and Prussia. So I lost my train. Well, anyway, only to discover that my friend Joseph actually called himself a Pole when taken prisoner, as opposed I called myself German. So here I was now among Poles that called themselves Polish, a group of. Well, anyway, we were shipped to a gathering place, and a French captain came and interviewed me, and he said, "Well, who are you?" They had no name, only what I told him, When he said, "Well, where do you come from?" I said, "Well, Katowice. I'm Pole." Because of in the new camp, we were fed good, as opposed to in the other one, and I nearly starved. Well, anyway. And then the important step that I mentioned earlier, even more important, a Polish captain came talking to us, in Polish, of course. I understood a few words, but I didn't know what it was all about. Then all of them stepped forward, all 300 of them. That was the main gathering in France of Poles. And all stepped forward, and of course, I stepped forward too. And by doing so, I found myself having stepped forward by saying, joining the Polish army in Italy. So we were shipped to Italy. To make it short, we were mustered out, we were actually part of the Second English Corps, a Polish unit, a Polish army. And of course, to make you understand why they had a high school in southern Italy by the name of Alessano. Why? Because the Poles lost the entire leadership, generals and officers and so on. The intelligentsia of Poland was murdered by the Soviets in Katyn, if you know Katyn Forest, where they were murdered. 13,000 of them. So they were leaderless. So they tried to rebuild the officer corps. And of course, here were young guys. They had a high school, and Joseph volunteered to go to high school. He said, come on along too. And of course, I was learning Polish fast, and it was easier because I knew that indigenous language that we spoke, the old Polish language, which we nowadays was called Wasserpolnisch. Well, anyway, we attended high school. That was already, the war was over. I attended high school. I made the grade. To this day, I can prove it. I have a certificate from high school. And of course, I had high school, German high school, 6 years of it, so some of the stuff, it was just, I knew it. All I needed to do is to learn how to write and read, so to speak. But then after high school, Joseph was telling me I'm going to cadet officer school in Matera, Italy. Well, why don't you come along? I would come along, and I think it took a year to the officer school, and then we were well, the end came because we were moved to England to demobilize. That's the word that I was looking for. Demobilize, meaning demobilize from soldiering to private life.
Civilian life.
And even then, they sent me to a school in Scotland to learn to be a forester, because I was interested in forestry where I grew up, surrounding forest. Well, then after graduation, they offered me a job in Africa, I think in Kenya or somewhere. Well, I didn't want to. And I needed more schooling according to the English. And that didn't go over too well. Well, I had all sorts of little jobs as waiter, bartender, messenger, box maker, and so on. Oh, sure. But waiter. And I was waiter at a place on Bayswater Road, which is opposite from Hyde Park. We actually were across the street. And I think the name of the place was Swan. The owner was a little lady, and she had 2 dogs. a poodle that had the run of the house or whatever, and a little dog, a Pomeranian, I think, and he would be on the bar, going from customer to customer, wanting to be handled. Anyway, my my job was the dining room. So, and this poodle dog, he would do nothing better than empty himself in my dining room under a table. So that was a dislike of the poodle. But it was a female poodle. So the lady, the owner, she said, now watch out for that dog, for my dog. Don't let a male get to her. Well, on a Sunday, I was busy setting up the tables outside, close to the avenue, Bayswater Road, actually, and Sunday afternoon, all the customers would come and sit at the table, ask for a drink, and sometimes it was the heck of a run, and I had to wait because the waiters, the bartenders inside would serve me. They would pour the beer. I was just, and sometimes they wouldn't do. They had their own customers to take care of, so it was very hectic indeed. And I come out, and there is a Labrador decking the female poodle. My God! And then I tried to ignore it because I was busy, But then the lady was told about it, or she heard about it, or whatever. She came running to me and she said, waiter, do something. And I remember grabbing jugs of water and pouring them on both dogs. And they would just move a few feet. And again, another jug, like a slapstick comedy, And then they finally went asunder, and the lady came, and you are fired. And I got fired on that Sunday. It just.
But Daddy, at this point, you're in England, right?
Right.
You moved from Italy to England.
Yes, we were in England.
Sent to
I was
England.
demobilized in,
So after the war, it was announced the war was over. Did you ever return to Germany? Did you ever return
I did
home?
not return to Germany. I was already in the United States in 1958. And the reason was my brother was getting married, and that was the reason for my going back to the wedding, following the invitation to come to the wedding. And it was very the old-fashioned way weddings, where a lot of people would come and they would dance, and
The whole village would shut down for the
not
wedding.
the whole village, but a good part of the village. And then, I had a movie made. I made a movie.
A video.
A video, yeah.
Well, how did you get to the United States then? Did you come from England over?
Well, from England. And I had all sorts of jobs, and in between I was jobless. I would go to Hyde Park or somewhere, and I just don't really know how I made the contact with two Americans, a younger man by the name John, and a guy, Tremblay from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and he was a flight engineer. And he asked me if I would show him important buildings, so I was kind of a guide for
Tourist
a few
guide.
days.
Mhm.
And then they went to visit friends. Well, afterwards, after they came back to England, because the flight was from out of England again, they somehow we came together again, and I mentioned I would like to come to the United States. So he took my name. He said, "I'll sponsor you," because at that time you had to have a sponsor. Well, in Tremblay, he was actually of French ancestry. You know, in the Northeast, there were some Canadians that came over, and because I don't know why they. Well, anyway, well, he sent me the documentation for immigration by being a sponsor. But then my first application was rejected because I belonged to the Hitlers. And then they done away with that law, so I could come, and I actually wanted to go to Alaska, thinking I will settle in Alaska, you know. They were even, at that time, I think 5 acres of land, you had to stay on it for 5 years and it becomes your land. Well, anyway, that was,
Quite a difference from here to there.
yeah, there was,
But you ended up coming to Tulsa.
Do you remember the day you came over to Tulsa? What was that like?
well, I arrived, I think, October the 10th. And I arrived late at night by railroad. And there was no way I could go after finding out that he lived close to the airport in one of the houses. So I stayed at a Wells Hotel, and I had to pay $20 a night. That was
Crazy.
almost all my money that I had
Mm.
in kind of loose money I had. And then next morning I went by bus. The Dawson bus took me there. I arrived at his house, and the realtor was pulling out the signs that he had. Maybe he was putting them in, maybe taking them out. I don't remember for sure. But the activity, I asked him what, because that was the house where the Tremblay lived, only to discover he had been moved back to New York. He was a flight engineer at Tulsa. They moved him back, and I didn't know the address of John, the other American. So here I was. I had 25 cents in the pocket, and I asked the realtor to take me back to town. And I remember having a donut and a coffee for breakfast, and then I asked the lady, where could I asked her for some question, and she said, well, go and see the world. I said, lady, I have seen the world. And she meant, but then I kept going the way she described, and then when I arrived at the building, it said Tulsa World. That's what she meant. And of course, the ad section, that's where she, and I looked for a place to stay. Well, I followed it on Cheyenne, North Cheyenne, and going back, the place was taken or something, so then I went back to town on foot, of course, and I saw for rent. Well, a lady owned it, and it was a base apartment in a basement room. That's all there was, and access to a restroom that I think shared. There were 2 apartments under the house. Well, anyway, and I said, "Lady, I don't have any money, but I will pay you after a week." Well, she let me have it, stay. Today, who would do that? She let me stay then, and I found myself a job looking for John, who I knew or heard they played
Bowling.
in a bowling alley, you know. So I followed that thing, hoping to meet him at a bowling alley. But instead of finding him, I found myself setting bowling pins for a living for a month or 2. It was hard work, and then I quit one day. My back was hurting, you know. I walked from Hackett's, which is 15th Street South, across town to. By then I lived with a elderly couple on Jasper, which is next to Boston, close to Pine, and they provided food and stay, live-in, except on Saturday and Sunday, which was okay. And as I walked back from the bowling alley, quitting, I walked past the railroads, and there was a machine shop. I looked into the window, and the owner came by. He saw me looking inside the shop, and I said, "I need a job." He said, "What can you do?" I said, "I can do anything. How about sweeping, shaving of a lace or whatever, you know?" "Yeah, I can do that. You would have to." So I got a job, and I worked there for 87 cents an hour for a year and a half. That's my first, well, actually the second job. And eventually I worked. They promised me a job which I asked for, and I quit because they didn't. Well, I had reason for quitting, and I found a new job. I said I never worked in a machine shop because it was very health
Unhealthy.
unhealthy place to work.
Breathe.
Very primitive, really, but they were doing very important work, you know. But the toilet, there was a little fence about that high, and when someone came, especially women, we would duck, we would bend over because we were open, you know, and they would spray paint valves and so on, and the air was permeated with this green paint. I remember in the morning, the day after, I would spit green paint out.
Oh.
Well, I quit, and then I worked for Vanderveers as show card writer. meaning ladies had $5 for the window, you know. Well, the condition, I walked across to Deep Rock, an oil company, and I should say I attended a drafting drafting course with some teacher from a high school. I forget his name now, but I made a little portfolio of what I can do, and at Deep Rock I applied, which was practically across from Vanderbilt downtown, and the guy said there is no work. But then I gave him the portfolio. He disappeared behind the door. He came back. He said, "You have a job." Apparently, he showed to some supervisor my portfolio, and apparently that convinced him that I was qualified for the job or something. So I worked for Deep Rock, and then I worked for, I won't tell you why I quit. It's not very good memory, but anyway, then I worked for Manhart, Millicent, Beebe, Petroleum Consultants, and then I finally worked for Skelly, and of course Skelly sold out to Getty, and Getty sold then out to Texaco, but the next step I didn't make it. So I retired from Texaco after a few months. They retired the whole drafting unit, and by then I became drafting supervisor, you know. Well, anyway, but that's the story.
Well, all these jobs. When did you find? Well, how did you meet your wife? When did you meet your wife, and how did you meet her?
Well, I lived on Jasper, and there was the Catholic Activities, which was about 3 blocks away on Denver, and they would meet every Friday, play ping pong. They had organization, a man that led the choir. We were sailing along on Moonlight Bay, I still remember. We were sailing along on Moonlight Bay. So that was an attraction, and my wife was from Parsons, Kansas. There were 7 children in the place. They were farmers. So she found a job in Tulsa, and she had a sister also that did work in Tulsa. And she had an uncle, a brother of my father-in-law, that lived on Quanah, which is Southwest Boulevard today. And of course, that house is no longer there because the expressway 275 has taken him out. In fact, he had a house and 3 or 4 little houses next to him, and that's how he made a living. He was renting the houses and swinging and on a swing on the porch and smoking cigars. That was
Uncle Bill.
Yeah, and collecting rent. But collecting rent in America to the lower class, that is an achievement. That's something, because I became it myself. Well, anyway, so that was more or less the whole story.
Well, how old were you when you got married?
I was, how old? I was in 58, so I was
No, it was 54.
54. You're right. 50,
Hmm.
58 is my brother's wedding. Well, 54, so 26 to 54. How
29.
many years is that?
You're about 29, 28, 29.
26 years old, 28?
28, 29, yeah.
28, yes, 28.
Hmm.
Well,
And by that time, you had
I
worked.
met her at the activities, and we would dance together and make trips to Roaring River in Missouri. There were 4 couples of us. We would actually meet down there and stay at Roaring River and some other place.
So do you remember your wedding day?
But
What was your wedding day like? Do you remember your wedding day? Did the whole village come? I assume.
well, it was a do-it-yourself job, really.
What do you mean by that?
We did everything ourselves. There was no parents of hers
Mm.
and no parents of me. They came for the day, so there was no
No assistance
No
in
assistance.
putting
No
the wedding
assistance.
together. It was
They-
at Holy
we had
Family.
Mhm.
we married at Holy Family, and in the basement was a reception, and those young people that we danced with or met at Catholic activities, they were invited. There was probably a group of 30 or 40 maybe, and that's where the the reception was, I think, I would say a ham, but I don't remember whether the father-in-law and mother-in-law, whether they cooked it and brought it, but it was kind of a do-it-yourself job, yeah, essentially. And we went to New Orleans because we planned it, and the day before I got fired from job. Yeah, and it was always, well, there were ups and downs,
New Orleans for the honeymoon.
in New Orleans.
I'll be darned. Yeah.
But the upshot was, life compensates. We went to New Orleans, and it was a rainy day. It rained all the way to New Orleans. Talking about a miserable day, We stayed in bed most of the time. And I don't make any inference. But anyway, we arrived in New Orleans. It rained all the time we were in New Orleans. That was May the 8th.
Mm-hmm. Good.
May the 8th, rainy season in New Orleans. And we came back on a Sunday, a week later, and my lady, landlady, I call her, she was actually a teacher, a retired teacher. She said, someone wants to give you a job. So Monday morning, I was out at the Jenkins building in Tulsa waiting for them to open it. And the guy interviewed me, and by 8 o'clock, 8:30 I think, I was on the board drawing $50 more than in the job where I was fired. So life compensates, and I have found that in my life, that it looks like the world is sweeping you into hellhole, only to discover there is a sunshine the next day, or life compensates. That's what I say.
And you had a series of people that were just kindness of strangers.
I stayed with this. The next day, where I stayed in the basement, I told you, I lived with the family because they provided the meals too. And he was a principal of a school, of Lincoln School in Tulsa. He was principal, and she was an ex-teacher. She quit. They hailed both from Colorado somehow. But that was, I lived with them maybe 2 years, and they were wonderful people and wonderful experiences. But there are also darks, like they had a daughter. She got married to a young man who worked for Sears. He had a good job, and he committed suicide. That was very traumatic for not only even for me, because I knew him. He would be in the house all the time, And then they also had a son. And surprisingly, I think he shot himself. They just bought a new house on Edison, which is northwest of town. And they even added a patio or something like that. And then the tragedy, and they lived across the street from before that, and they had a child, and the child would reach out the arms and hands to me, not to the dad. Sometimes I found it embarrassing, almost to a point that, the child, I want to remember the name of her, I don't. But anyway, because I spent more time with them than he did, I guess. Well, anyway, that was the stay at the Denny's. His name was Denny's. He introduced me to painting. On some Saturdays, and we would meet at somewhere in the school, not in a class, but in a room, not very important, but that's where we painted with some of his friends, maybe 4 or 5 of them, and he brought me along and introduced me to them, and we would paint maybe 2-3 hours for I don't know how many Saturdays, because I just moved on eventually, Yeah, that's.
Do you remember your first painting?
It was Niagara Falls, and I was really proud of it, because, in fact, I donated it to Dr. Denny. He was a doctor. I was amazed that they would take me into their household, but they had a big house on East Jasper, 128 East Jasper, which is Jasper, Independence, and then Pine. They go alphabetical. Pine, yes. Well, that's. But getting back to my childhood, so as you can see, I lived with my language up to age 6. We were us and Germans were them, essentially. But then, once I got to live in Opole or the Oppen, my high school, it changed my life. I got to learn Germans. I became a German, so to speak. Before that, I was nobody. But then, all of a sudden, I became prisoner of war in the army, German army, German Luftwaffe. But then, prisoner of war, and I completely, well, at one point, I suffered great anguish after becoming Polish because it occurred, in fact, I wanted to switch back to being a German, before I became Polish, after I became Polish, because I realized the implication. If the Poles found me to be German, they could have mistaken me for a spy, and they could have shot me. But on the other side, if the Germans made a move and took me back, they would have shot me because of,
Leaving
yeah,
there.
although I became free after escaping prisoner of war days, but I wasn't free really. There was great tension and anguish. How do you, anyway, that was, and eventually I not only lived a Pole, I became a Pole. But all of a sudden, after 4 years or 3 years, I found myself to be waiter, bartender at a golf club at Henley-on-Thames, if you ever heard of Henley-on-Thames, in Oxfordshire, away in the country. It was Lord Naffield private golf club. And the elite of England would come and play golf at this particular place. Well, I worked there for a year and a half, and I really liked it. I got to know everyone because it was a live-in place. There were they had live-in workers like bed makers and sweepers and whatever, and there must have been a staff of maybe 12 or so, and I knew every one of them, and I lived in the place, got fed by the place, and all that. It was a wonderful, relaxing place to live in. 12 miles from Henley-on-Thames. And we would visit on our day free Henley-on-Thames and other towns surrounding us, including Oxford, was just maybe 12 miles away. Well, one day, and I got to know the manager's wife. And I got to know her because I spoke German and she was an Austrian. She spoke German too. So we conversed and exchanged pleasantries, and not only pleasantries, we would talk whenever we had a spare time in German. And I would divulge that I was actually a German, not a Pole, to her. But all my papers were Polish, don't you see? So one day I was talking to the taxi driver, the taxi driver came, it was her husband day off, and they were going to town. And I talked to the taxi driver, a familiar figure, I knew him quite well, through the window. And here she called me Hubie very loud. And I didn't act immediately. I wanted to excuse myself and close the window and whatever. Well, then she came into the dining room where everybody was eating his breakfast, and she says, "Why don't you answer if I don't call you?" In that kind of. I said, "You don't have to shout at me." Well, that raised her voice even more, So again, I said, you don't be. I forgot the word now. Don't be hysterical, perhaps. I made it louder. But don't shout at me too hysterical. Well, that done it. You damn German, in front of the whole staff. Well,
You were outed.
and I regret having said it, but I did. You old bag.
And that ended that job.
And I was out of a job again. It cost me my job.
But,
I still
but,
have the.
but you were German again.
Yeah, no, not again.
Not again.
I had to prove.
Uh,
I did go to the authorities and had to bring documentation that I was born in Hirschfelde and whatever. Well, I did, and I became a German. But by doing so, that was not a good decision. Because before that, I could have any job I applied for except the king. I could not become king. Anyway, I didn't want to become. But now that I was a German, I was restricted by the government had to approve my job or the job that someone wanted to give me. And he had to prove that it could be, he could not find anyone else, and he had to have me to fill this job.
A German.
And they would approve it, and then I would. So it was a restricted life, whatever. Well, I tried to get by. By then, I went twice to Germany wanting to find a job. That was in 1948. Germany was destroyed, just terrible. My gosh, city after city.
But at that time, did you go back home? No,
No,
you just
I
went
didn't.
to. You
No,
had
I
not
didn't.
gone
That
home
was
yet.
in 1948 or 1949. I went twice. So emigration, I tried to find emigration. Well, eventually I succeeded after the first denial coming in, but I succeeded coming in, and I came, and that's. But my story difficulties didn't end, as you probably figured out. It was tough, finding job, being fired, and so on.
and establishing your own identity again.
Yeah, that was, and there was lots of hostility against Germans, even in the early 50s in America. There was still, people that lost their someone. In fact, our children, the boys especially, two of them, they didn't want to identify with German. In fact, I wanted them to, Steve, I wanted him to have learned German, which he could have had. He said, no, I take Spanish. That was, well, anyway.
So, and you had a family. How many children did you have?
5.
You-
My
Four?
wife had them.
Well, yeah, she had them.
I'm kidding.
So 5. How many boys? How many girls?
2 boys and 3 girls.
Wow.
But we had the first born was a stillborn. So we actually had 6, maybe 7. There may have been one
She had a miscarriage, yeah, later. But
after. There was another 7th, but it was just a fetus, maybe a few weeks old.
but it was 5 kids in 6 years, so it was like we were on top of each other.
How and your German identity? Did you blend that into your family? Did you teach your children any customs? Or
Well,
any...
it was difficult, unless they really tried. Some of them did not get the story. It's very convoluted.
It's hard to
you know.
believe the story.
They am I Polish or German? It's convoluted. I mean,
It's hard to understand.
it's into my ancestry, according to my grandson who had it done. The results were my ancestors were 72% were Czechs, Slovaks, and Polish, and 28% were Lithuanians and Russian. So that's very strange. But everybody is strange without knowing,
Yeah.
I mean, people think that he's 100% German because he was born in Germany. Not so, the people, Germany expanded to the east by incorporating Prussia into their kingdom, or I should say Prussia actually was the pump that brought it about. Bismarck was the chancellor of Prussia, and he united Germany, and relatively late in 1871. So Germany was really a new country, not since 1200, I think. That was the Second Reich that Bismarck did, and Hitler did the Third Reich, the third one. But the first one was in the 12th century under, I think, Barbarossa, who made a crusade to the Middle East, and where other kings went by train or by sea, he used the land route across Turkey and the Balkan. And in Turkey, apparently, he died on the way to Palestine or to Jerusalem, because that's what it was all about.
So, what do you identify with then? If someone says, "Where are you from?" or
Oh, I have no difficulty at all.
saying,
I am citizen of planet Earth, and no one can deny me that, because it was common. I heard it often at work. They would say, I would participate in a conversation, especially during the Vietnam War, which I was very much against, you know. They say, you wouldn't know about American way. You are a foreigner, which I was. I was a foreign guy. But then I went visiting Germany. That was in the late 80s. My brother had come from the Siberia back, and he established his stay in Frankfurt. So I visited him, and of course there were then all those that came from Silesia, my parents and Valdemar, my brother and sister. We were sitting there, and one of my brother, Joseph, I think, said in a hot discussion, he said, "What the hell happened to you? You are completely American." You see, they didn't accept me in America, and my own brother in Germany didn't accept me because I had become an American. So I went to China and had a chop made. You know what a chop is?
Mm-hmm.
A stamped citizen of planet Earth. And no one can deny me that. In fact, you are a citizen, and you are a citizen of the planet Earth beside being American. We have all right to be called that the superior. We didn't grow up on Mars or born on Venus or whatever. We grew up on, and this is our home.
You did become a citizen of the U.S.
Yes, I am.
Yes, in
Yes, I am. I had to do it twice because the first time I failed. I failed answering the right question, you know. I wasn't very informed. I had my problems of raising children and going or holding a job and whatever, you know. So I didn't study the book that we were given extensively and consequently. Or maybe I'm just not smart enough because I had to go twice to do the driver's license. First time I failed.
First time I did too, so.
So, you know. But I told you, so I lived in the German society, in the Polish society. Now I was in England. I was accepting the English way. And now all of a sudden, I went to America, and I suppose some Americanism hangs on me whether I like it or not, by association. Does that answer your question?
It does, but not. You could have moved again. Why stay in Tulsa?
Could I have moved again?
Yes, you could have moved. Why did you stay in Tulsa? What was it about Tulsa that?
Well, first of all,
You moved it.
there are many things that, you know, makes you do. Instead of going to Alaska, I had made contacts, I made friendships, I had a job.
You're married.
And then children, you know. In fact, we were, when Getty merged Skelly into Getty, my job, and I had a job that it was one in the whole company of 4,500 people. So they had one president, Skelly, and I was the only one, geophysical technician, because I was in drafting with Skelly, and they, in the geophysical section, meaning where they explore by geophysical means the earth, trying to find oil, and of course that's a tedious job, seismic sections and so on, and they try to put it all digitized and on the computer. So I found myself doing the digitize with a new job, digitize, and then that was the early days. All the information was after digitizing it, putting it on cards, and the cards run through the machine, and it was a
Tedious task.
time-consuming job. So to get one outprint of a section, they had that many cards. Virtually 1,000 cards would go through the machine quickly, and they discovered then, even though it would get a printout, but it would take 5-6 hours for one section, where in a modern machine it would take minutes, So when they merged my geophysical but my job remained geophysical technician, although they discontinued doing the geophysical work on computer, but they used me kind of for all sorts of. I was kind of a hand of the vice president. At one time I went to get his whiskey bottle out of the car, which was parked in the car. I'm saying that, but I did all sorts of things privately to the vice president. I found myself doing it by hand, graphs, and some of them, and I really wasn't trained in graphs, but some of them were so strange, they had to figure out the meaning of it anyway. So then when we merged with Getty, the geophysical job, the only one in the company, they had big computers in California. Getty did have the 360 or whatever it took, and they were actually using it. So they wanted to transfer me to California, and my wife says, well, you will have to go alone. I'm not going. And the kid said, we are staying home too.
Oh, it wasn't like that, but we all cried and like, oh, we can't go to California.
So I went to my boss and I said, I cannot go. It's just too much trouble. So, that was when Texaco took over. No, that was Getty. Well, they made me supervisor at Getty. Instead of going to California, supervisor of drafting, where I was originally. So I had some problems at the beginning, because you can understand, some were vying for the same job, and here comes Hubert, a foreigner, which I was, getting the job. Life is a struggle, that's what I say.
Yep. You have to roll with the punches sometimes.
Yeah.
So where do you consider home?
This earth is my home. Although I must say I have great attraction to my village. It still is, and I've been there just last year. And Julie and the other daughter went with me just so I wouldn't fall off the airplane. Hold my hand, yeah.
So since retirement, what have you done for like activities? You paint.
Yes.
What else?
Well, I have been dancing for the German American Club till recent times, till this problem started, maybe 6 weeks ago. I collected rocks. I kept bees.
Okay.
I had 8 hives at one
wow.
time, right in our yard, and so on. I went to China and studied art in China at the famous Academy of Fine Art in Hangzhou. I went to India, visited a friend's family, and visited Ceylon, which has a different name now. What? Ceylon? It's a teardrop on the side of India.
Sri Lanka?
Sri Lanka, thank you. Yeah, Sri Lanka.
And you wrote poetry?
But
And you wrote poetry?
I wrote poetry, bad poetry, some of it. I made lots of workshops. I think too many workshops can ruin your identity. You know, you copy someone else's. But I did go primary for the adventure. So I joined the group painters, watercolor painters in I went to Ireland at one time. I went to many times to Mexico. I made watercolor workshop offshore in the Atlantic up there in South Carolina, I think. I forgot the name of it.
Did you make it to Alaska?
I made it to Alaska on a cruise one time. Yeah. I made it to India. I bicycled in India and I bicycled in China, and I bicycled in Europe with my brother one time from Paris to Frankfurt. And one time I bicycled by myself from Amsterdam to Frankfurt, along the Rhine River mostly. And one time I bicycled from Vienna to my hometown in Poland now, all by myself. You know, and I bicycled in America. What do they call that?
Free will.
Free will. They call it
Parts of
free will
Oklahoma.
because it was free when they started.
Tulsa
It didn't cost anything, but over time it became $400 to participate in free, and I did it 36 times.
Oh my gosh.
Each time 450 miles,
And camping out
which
every
takes
night.
a week.
Yeah.
And I did it 33 times, all of it. But the last 3 times I cheated. I did only selected level grounds.
And that counts. So.
I had my daughter-in-law, my brother, wife of my son, she would be the driver. So with the iPhone, I said, "Come and get me." When the highway got too steep, you know.
You go down the hills, but not up.
Yeah, down the hill, mostly, yeah. So I went to Ireland, as I said.
So you're a citizen of the world and a traveler of the world.
Well,
He's been
not
very
all, but
fortunate.
Yeah.
I went to South America, Argentina,
Oh, wow.
He's been a lot
and
of
to
places.
Guatemala, and to the central Costa Rica and Panama. You know,
And how many different languages have you learned?
well, English is my fourth language, and then I'm learning Spanish, and I read Spanish pretty good, but I don't have exposure to, you know.
So on a typical day now, what do you do? Like what time do you get up and how do you spend your
Well,
time?
I get up mostly at 5 o'clock, 5:30. Sometimes I oversleep, I must add, but mostly like today, 5 to 5, I think it was. So I would try to snooze or doze or whatever, another 20 minutes. But normally I get up at 5:30. I make coffee and so on. I used to do calisthenics getting up. I have done it. I quit doing it when I got sick because I was so tired. So my energies was just gone. So I didn't feel like I have a bar in the hall where I would pull myself up, you know.
Chin-ups?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you usually go on your bike at about 7:30.
I used to go walk every morning. Then I sprung a bad knee. I should have had a new one put in like most Americans do. But instead of walking, I decided bicycling. So I would bicycle every morning 5 miles in the neighborhood. And then in the afternoon, I would bicycle a little further, maybe 12 miles or 8
At Riverside.
along the river, you know. But in the process of having bicycled for 2 years now, maybe, or well, I bicycle all along, but this morning bicycle instead of walking, I discovered my problems have solved themselves. I can walk now. In fact, the other day I walked 2 miles. No, I take it back. Mile and a half along Riverside. And of course, I have to sit down and convenience. I walk the area up there that they have benches that I can sit and whatever. So that's what it is.
So then let's get back to your poetry. What can you recite your favorite? Tell us about your favorite poem and recite it.
No, I can't recite it.
Well, tell us about your favorite one.
You can read it.
I can read it.
Okay, that's
You
good.
want me to read it in Spanish or read it in
English.
In English.
Oklahoma ease.
Yeah, put your twang on it.
A new beginning. Well, I don't know where it is.
You want to do a new beginning?
It's under amor. Love.
Is that
No,
it?
that's not it. Amor. Green. Amor.
There it is.
And they misspelled it. That's not the way I wanted it. Here it's spelled. Oh, okay. I wrote Amor in Mexico. I was one of 12 students that came to learn Spanish. So the teachers tested us, and they discovered that I was the only advanced student in Spanish. So they had two classes. They had 11, one class, and I was one. I was the only one student to have a woman teacher. So it was a one-on-one place. It was very lovely because I could talk Spanish all the time. And I must say, then I was more efficient or better than today, 30 years later. But anyway, but I forgot to tell you that I was shaving, and all of a sudden I remembered, my God, you forgot to do your homework. And I didn't want to be embarrassed by coming to class and say, I forgot, So I took a pencil and a piece of paper, and I kept shaving. And every time a good idea came to me, I would put it down on paper. And so on. I went on shaving and putting down. By the time I finished shaving, I had basically the paint. Then I went back and quickly transcribed my scribbling in better print and corrected some and whatever. And an hour later, I was in class handing over my poem. And so the teacher, without looking at it, just put it into a folder. And next day, she came and she said, I brought your poem, it's pretty good, very good, or something like that. And then she said, I would want you to sign it. I said, okay, I signed it. And then she said, and now that you signed it, I would like to have some copies of it. I said, yes, you can have copies. And I do have the original somewhere in my folder, but here I will read it from the book.
Okay.
Amor. Love is everything. It is light which enters darkness. It is morning dew, rain for the parched, arid lands. It is fire burning without end. What is this that we call love? What is this sonorous sense, so pure and so simple? It is the light you make possible, visible in the darkness. It is the sun whose rays in the universe so cold and burning give cordiality, enthusiasm, and ardor. It is a downpour in the dry, parched, and so wearisome hills. It is a gulp of fresh water for the lips dry, crazy of thirst. It is a river running and jumping elegantly from rock to rock, from stone to stone. It is a choir of voices, an exquisite band, an orchestra, an ensemble so festive. Give the light, give the water, give it with generosity. It is something you possess in great quantities. and can never exhaust. For the more you give it, the more you have it. Love is the rain. It is the light. It is the fire eternal. Love is the beginning and it is the end. Love is everything.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Now in Spanish.
You want me to read it in Spanish?
I couldn't resist.
But,
I could not resist saying that.
well,
They were all very good. I like the one about and the winds, the different
Oh, winds.
the different
I
winds.
made a translation in 3 languages, in German and Polish.
That was
and-
good.
But I don't think the winds, yes. There are some alliteration in, and I look, if you notice, I have one alliteration in love. Did you know that?
I do
Did
now.
you recognize it? You know what an alliteration is?
You tell me.
Where the sentence you start with the same letter, like, and I was teaching. We had an annual meeting at Robert's Cave, and there were children of our children, and we would meet for pumpkin seed spitting contest every year, and I was the
MC.
big guy.
No,
Now, what did I want to?
I don't know where.
Well, anyway, I was at 11 o'clock. We would sit in the fire at night. We were sitting around the fire, and I was teaching him alliteration. Alliteration is where you say a sentence beginning with the same letter. So this son of my friend, he came up with a fabulous, and to this day I remember the alliteration. Let's see if I can remember. It Buddy Boy bought bananas by the bag. That was a classic. I mean, you don't have to do every word. You do 2 or 3 is enough. Sometimes very impressive. Amor.
Oh, I was just looking at popcorn. I like popcorn too.
Well, let's see if I can.
It's towards the
Amor.
front. Yeah, in
I
the front.
had it. Amor. Well, I may just. I don't know the.
Like we sow seashells by the seashore.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Pull that out.
Well, I can find it. There is. You see, there is an indication here. What is this sonorous sense? So pure and so simple. So you have sonorous sense, so. But I'm not looking there. There is maybe another one that is. I'm holding it up. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
It-
So, are you done?
I have one final question for you. when history is written, when history is written, when your final chapter of life is written, how do you want to be remembered?
He surmounted it all. The problems. You know, a lot of problems, and we are all in the same boat. A lot of problems, whether individual or national, a lot of problems we create ourselves. And we have to come to the understanding or the inside of it that the problems are our own creation. I don't care what it is. And I could bring examples, but you can look into your own life and say, because you done it, you stepped into it. You didn't have to, but you did for some reason, you know, or so. And I may say, the more you have wealth or whatever, the more problems you have. And with it, you can create. And you can see that, especially at people that come into great money, great fortune, all of a sudden, they go crazy and everything seems to go wrong. From marriages splitting up to shooting each other to hating each other to whatever. So, and I don't need to elaborate on it. It's self-explanatory, I think.
Absolutely.
Does that satisfy you?
That satisfies me.
Is there anything left on your bucket list you want to do?
What I would like to do to get well, that's on my bucket list, number one. And how do I get well? Not by sitting. I need to move, and I try to, and try to extend the move, you know, instead of just two circles walking around the play area, make it three. That's what I did this morning. And I think it's so much easier for me to walk now than it was 3 weeks ago. I could not walk any distance, period. I was very weak because, well, the problem I had was the prostate shut off completely and would not let my urine get out. So it accumulated in my, wherever it could. In fact, inundating my kidneys. That's what the doctor said. So once they found it out, they drained all that, and I think 3 liters flowed within a few minutes, within 2-3 minutes, but then over a length of time, another 3 liters. And that helped some. I noticed it helped me some, but gradually to recover. So, and the doctor told me I had to stay in the hospital for 4 days. And he said, for 4 days, for every day in the hospital, it takes 3 days to recover. Well, I'm past that
12 days.
3 times 4,
12.
that'd be 12. I passed the 12. I recovered considerably, but I'm not here. And maybe I never fully recover because my age. The reality is, hey, and I'm just sliding in every day, deeper and deeper.
Well, I think you've done great today, so I appreciate you sharing
Well,
with us.
thank you.
So thank you.
I was to sing the song that of my home area, which is Oberschlesien. I was to sing it at the dedication of the stone last year, the stone dedication, the marker of the foundation of my village. That was the reason for my going to the village.
It's the 250th anniversary of being
250.
founded. Yeah.
But somehow I even prepared singing it. I even translated it from the German to the Polish. And I was going to first read it in Polish and then sing it in German. But somehow they didn't give me the opportunity. Well, although I paid for the marker,
He donated for the whole thing.
they didn't give me it just, let's see. Du oberschlesische Heimat, du Welle rauschendes Land, wie festlich sind deine Fluren, der oder silbernes Band. Still betend falt ich die Hände, schau, schau zum Himmel hinaus. Du oberschlesische Heimat, du Wälder, rauschendes Land. What it says, you upper Silesia land of forest that murmur, land of beauty, of fields and forests. The ribbon, land of the ribbon of the Oder River, the main river which is navigable, goes through it. So it says the ribbon, the silvery ribbon adorning your land. Quietly I fold my hands and look up to heaven and pray. You upper Silesia, you land of the murmuring forest.
Beautiful.
It is very pretty. Yes.
But I had it translated, but they didn't give me. Well, I'm not. I'm not.
Well, thank you for doing that. Anything else you want to sing or add before we cut it off again?
Well, I think I used to sing in the quiet, and I noticed I started too high. I had to change the ladder. But here it is. I used to sing each time the children got married, at their wedding I would sing it. Did I sing it at your wedding?
Or the rehearsal dinner.
Yeah. It's, let's see. Can you tell me the beginning?
No.
No, hold it. Und die Blümlein, sie blühen so lieblich im Grün. Sie brauchen die Sonne zum schönen Vergrün. Doch der Mensch braucht ein Herz und der Mensch braucht ein Herz, dem er seins kann vertrauen. Dem er seins kann vertrauen. And the flowers, they bloom so lovely in the green of the meadows. They need sunshine for complete they need sunshine to complete a full bloom. Yet man needs a heart he can trust in, a heart he can live with. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But the key word I forgot to, and der Mensch braucht ein Herz. A man needs a heart to confess in, or to, there's another word that escapes me. Sorry about that.
No,
Oh,
that's okay.
no.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Are we done? Are we done?
Yes, we are done. I think.
Thank you again.